Welcome to the Painting Insights podcast. We have been working on something in the background.
That's right. We've actually started a Patreon channel. For the last couple of months, we've had previous guests revisit the channel to give us additional content, everything from studio tours, sketchbook tours, talking us through the process of paintings and all kinds of additional treats, which you're exclusively going to see as a patron who supports the channel.
So by supporting us on Patreon, you help the channel keep going. There's a lot of work put into this, from the video editing to the sourcing of guests. So you really help us find those guests and to put the content out.
And we have lots of content planned for the near future. So the links for that will be in the description of this video and in the description on the podcast channels. And otherwise, you can go on to Patreon and type in Painting Insights Podcast and support us that way. Thanks very much. Enjoy the video. Okay, so would you mind introducing yourself for the audience, please?
Yeah, my name's Gita Joshi. I am the editor at Art Scene magazine. I'm the host of the Curators Salon podcast. I'm an independent curator and art dealer. I'm the author of the book called Show Your Art.
Wow, that's fantastic. How long have you been doing this kind of work?
So I originally trained in art history, and I think, like a lot of people, I thought that to work in the arts, if you were not an artist, you had to work for a museum or something like that, for an institution. And that did not turn into one of my early jobs. And so I actually deviated into a career, through architecture, working for the Royal Fine Art Commission and architects' practices into finance. And I think it was around 2008 or 9, I took a program in curating. So I think it was since about 2008-9, because that's where I realized this art history and interest in the art world that I'd had in the background had finally kind of found a way to blend with business and actually, being a player in the industry. So what is that, about 15 years now, I guess?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it started off, that curating program had me kind of be really inspired to actually find my own way and be more independent and that sort of thing. And I think I look back on that and think, actually, it made a lot of sense that I had to diverge into different careers, because I know a lot of artists also do this, right? I mean, it then feeds into the artwork and the artists that they actually become. But I did a couple of shows, Somerset House, art fair up in Manchester, and then came back to London and decided, okay, I was ready for premises. And so I opened a gallery in central London in Waterloo. And it was actually only a pop-up. Pop-ups were a thing back then, back in, what was that, 2013 or something. Lots of people were offering like short leases and a lot of empty retail, just the status of the economy at that time. But yeah, so, what was a 6-month lease? We just kept renewing and kept going for, I don't know, 2 and a bit years, I think.
Mm. Well, if I can, I think what I'd like to ask is, because to give a bit of background, I work with a gallery in North Wales called Finner Park, and I've been privileged enough to go with the gallerist to visit artists and see him selecting the work for a show. So I think the viewers and listeners would be really interested in seeing what being a curator entails. What can you tell us your job asks of you or demands of you and your skills?
Gosh, I think it's so many things when we break it down. But for me, it usually starts with an idea of a show that I want to put together. And that is really around the concept, the theme that I want to present. Sometimes it is born out of just visiting artists in their studios and thinking, oh my God, I would love to put their work in a show. And then, going into my mental archive, I might have ideas of another artist whose work I would want to put it with, or something like that. So it really starts with that idea. But I do visit a lot of artists in their studios, partly to support them, whether I know them, sometimes to see the work in real life, to have more intimate conversations with them that we don't get on social media, for all these reasons. So I'm kind of developing, let's say, like a mental bank of, people whose work I would be interested in doing something with some point, or, even like pairing them up with somebody else I know or referring them to other people. So, yeah, these things are kind of working in tandem all the time. But when I do have an idea for a show, then I'm looking to put artists in it. It's really about how much it fits in with the theme, and is it offering another perspective on whatever let's say the core theme of that exhibition would be. But as I say, there's been other times where I've seen artists work and thought they would be great with this other artist, and that work would be in really great dialogue, or we'd be able to put forward another sort of idea and way of seeing things. So yeah, it's a bit organic. It's not that specific or by rote or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, then this might be a bit difficult to answer, but I'm going to ask anyway because I'm always curious. What do you think? What would you like artists to do to make your job easier in the selection process? Is there something where you find if artists only knew this or one of these things, it would make my job a little bit easier to work with them to get the best out of their work for the show?
I think there are times when artists show me, or they have too much diversity in their work. I am looking for consistency. That does tell me that they've kind of found their visual language, that they know what they're doing. Now, it's fine to be experimental and all the things, but I don't think you need to be leading with that, right? When you're public facing, right? I think you're experimenting and trying new things kind of happens uh, in the privacy of your own studio time. But I think at the point you're meeting even your own collectors or gallerists or curators or anything like that, it's really important to put forward a slightly more cohesive body of work where we can see, a strong visual language. That is really something I always look for. And that tells me, that they've arrived at where they are. And usually, that even if they're telling me about they're working on something else in the studio, the things that they're actually presenting to me make sense. That the new work that they're creating that's still on the easel or whatever it is a follow-on for that, but that's not ready and that's not fully formed. But it tells me that they've got momentum there. So I would say that is one thing. So on studio visits, that is where it's very disruptive to see everything somebody's ever made, or something like that. So that would be one thing. And then what else would make it easier? Yeah, I think if they understood marketing as well. So then, it becomes a more collaborative process, which I'm very open to when I'm working with artists, rather than me having to only lead on everything as well. So I think, I think
No, I was just
understanding
going to ask if we can
marketing
go
is.
into the marketing side then.
Mm.
What should artists know to help market themselves to benefit both themselves and you and the publication um, that you are promoting them through?
Yeah, so the art scene is the magazine. That is it's its own sort of separate project in terms of the work I do. But in terms of marketing, I mean, I think everything is marketing, right? We're all in the marketing business. I think it was Gary Vaynerchuk or somebody that said that, and it suddenly does make sense, right? A lot of times, even exhibitions are marketing efforts, and we occupy this very interesting space between the commercial world because artists do want to sell their work, and when I'm showing their work, I want to sell their work, and the culture space, which is kind of so revered that we don't like to talk about money other than like how underfunded it is. So there's this kind of blurred line. But fundamentally, I think, your marketing efforts are about raising your visibility and your credibility. And, that can look like being present on social media. It can be making sure you've got a polished website. I mean, those are the fundamentals there. Because even if I were to talk about your work to, somebody that I'm going to go and have coffee with, the next thing they're going to say is, can you show me his work? So only with a phone in my hand, I should be able to like pull up your work, your Instagram or your website and direct them. So, even when you have offline presentations of your work, whether it's in a print publication or it's on in an exhibition, for example, we do need to have that online presence to actually support our offline efforts. And of course, your online marketing is usually a lot more evergreen there as well. So just understanding that it's not just a nice to have, it is pretty fundamental to an artist's sort of visibility, credibility, momentum, all those sorts of things. And I think social media, as an example, does make us feel a bit closer to people that we really admire. I was in Venice recently, and when I can like tag Yinka Shonibare or somebody like that, right, it makes me feel that bit closer. And when his studio likes my post back, right, I feel like I'm just that bit closer. So there is something about that. And I think, the artist is, there's this concept of the artist that's in their studio doing their thing and very oftentimes isolated, but bringing people into your world through sharing what's going on in the studio, or telling people about the exhibitions you've got, or reminding us that you had this great show last year, just so that new audience is aware that you've been around longer than perhaps they've known about you. It's all really quite important to build that momentum there as well and make you more talk aboutable. It's always good as well.
I think that a lot of artists do lack that ability to kind of hone their online environments to make it look as though it's been just photographed and considered well enough for the marketplace, as opposed to a dumping ground of sketches or something which can be a little bit more personal. It's not quite as professional. I mean, I myself definitely need to do that with my Instagram, but what I do have is that my co-host, who sadly couldn't join us for this episode, he told me something which he does, which he advised me to do, is to change my profile picture to an image of myself as opposed to a drawing that I'd done, because he said that as a host of a podcast, it's more personable and it gives a good, kind of a presentation for the audience. Is there any tips like that that you could give to any artists listening? Because they may hear us talking about this and still think, I don't know where to begin. So what would you give them as a few tips to help them along?
I would say I think having your bio, let's start with that, having the word sort of visual artist or painter or whatever it is that you do, however you identify, is quite important up there, rather than, I don't know, something like, that you're just exploring themes of landscape or something like that, right? It's very vague and poetic as it might be. It doesn't really give us a handle on who you are. So just making sure that that is really telling us what you do. And the bio is something that you can, like all these things, is change it up every so often, see what lands with different people. So, just kind of keeping that refreshed is a good idea. None of these things are like fixed forever. I usually suggest people use the stories as a behind the scenes, so what's going on in the studio, and then imagining the grid for Instagram as more of the showroom, let's say. So if you've got available work or you're promoting exhibitions, then that can mostly go up in the grid. And then if you wanted to share more about what's going on in the studio, whether you're trying new things or you're packing up things for an exhibition to be shipped off, or you're taking things to the post office, that bit more day-to-day life can be much more personal. And of course, you can, of course, be promoting your exhibitions up there as well. But that is a way to separate those two kind of functions on Instagram, for example, because we know that behind the scenes content really gives people an insight into the human behind the work. And when there's nothing there, it's not really creating that mystique that you think it might be. It's just going, oh, I'm not interested, or they're not interested back. So, one of the things that makes, when we look at successful artists, is that it's the human, right? I mean, you can think of it's hard to remember a title by a Rothko painting, for example, but when we think of Rothko, we can think of, certain pictures and images and things like that come to mind. So, it tells us that, people are interested in the human journey, the human experience, and that's where you can share more about yourself, even if you are going out for a walk to, you know, get a bit more inspiration, or, you know, a screenshot of our podcast that tells people that what you're listening to when you're in the studio. So
Yeah.
just that kind of a bit more conversational and approachability often is how I would split that out with the stories and the grid. The other thing for the grid is, I know everybody talks about reels and that's great and they do work and all the things, but I do recommend carousels as well. And, you know, these are those posts where you have multiple images that you slide through. So a good example of that would be where you have a picture of an artwork, and then the next couple of slides would be some details of it, or maybe how it looked, you know, I don't know, a month ago when you started working on it. So you can, you know, do it in different ways, and then yeah, you know, what it looks like framed if it's a finished work, for example. So using the carousel to kind of give a slightly more enriching experience of a single artwork at a time is something I like to see, and it is something that I do encourage and advise artists to do.
It is interesting to see that selection, almost a storytelling where you can flick through and see a progression, can't you, to a theme sometimes with the post. I wonder as well, because some guests have expressed a reluctance to piggyback onto trends, because I think that as much as it can work to gain visibility, it can also put you into a grouping where people feel as though you are I don't know. It can attract judgments that are slightly negative about how you are influenced and how you're trying to influence others. What's your thoughts and feelings around the trends on Instagram, that whether they work or not? How do you feel about them?
So the trends are, I mean, the consistency along this is that relatability, that authority of the artist in terms of like what they've done before, how they arrived at where they're at. All this kind of messaging is going to always stay the same. It's just how it's then presented, whether you're doing it in a reel or you're dancing or you're spinning around a painting and things like that. I don't really care for it. I personally don't have that much judgment around it. If I can at some point actually see that carousel where I can see details of the artwork and I can see the fully completed thing. So, you know, and then of course, you know, if it is a trend on Instagram, for example, you know, and you're not happy with it, you can of course delete it, right? I mean, it's that function is there for you. Yeah, I think you do need to balance the Reels trends, particularly with carousels, to actually give us a stable picture that we can actually look at. Again, using the example of when I go for coffee and I talk about your work, if you've spun it around so fast or you've panned the room, you know, in your studio and we just got a glimpse of it, like this is not a great experience, right? When I'm trying to talk. So if you had, then here it is, and I can show them in a much slower carousel about your artwork, that is going to be a more supportive thing. So you can use the reels and the reels trends for reach, but then make sure that you've got that slightly more substantive content there as well.
Hmm. And what is it that currently is exciting and interesting to you about the art scene? What is it you're seeing or experiencing with artists that's really getting you inspired by what's being made and shown at the moment?
I think for me, I'm really kind of drawn to painting again. You know, for a while it was mixed media, it was collage. So I'm really, yeah, interested in painting again, and figurative painting, but also, you know, those artists that are using a very loose, almost semi-abstract kind of sense of their language, you know, in the way they're presenting. So fundamentally, we're looking at an abstract painting, but you know, when you look at it long enough, you can see that there's actually some figurative training behind that. And I think that is something I'm kind of unraveling a bit more as well, and really enjoying that. So for me, you know, a lot of my attention is going to artists that I see at art fairs that are doing really well. I do really like going to the other art fair where the artists are self-repping on the stands, and getting to speak to them and seeing that. I think you know, there's some really interesting work coming out of some various sort of Nigerian and Ghanaian art schools. You know, there's a lot of, yeah, very cool work coming out of those places that I've seen.
I'm wondering, because you've experienced talking to artists quite a lot, do you have any advice for artists who maybe are struggling to reconcile that professional lifestyle with maybe the economic struggles, or any kind of direction that you see artists struggling with in their professional life?
Yeah, I think one thing I would like to say is that it's absolutely fine to have other income streams, right? It's very normal for an artist to have multiple income streams, and that might be that some have a day job or they have a full-time job. And certainly a lot of the artists in my world are that bit older. They're not straight out of art school, so they've got, rent and mortgages and other commitments and things. And I just think, there is sometimes shame around that, which I really feel doesn't need to be there. If you've got time to make your work and just, keep at it, and, maybe that also is you being your own patron, that you can afford to then do an art fair or something like that. Then I think that's absolutely fine. There is this quest to be a full-time artist and be reliant solely on art sales, and for sure that is viable, but everybody's journey to that point, it can be, slow and different, and there's other things that come along the way. There's artists that will do murals, some will do graphic design, whatever else their skill set is capable of, and whatever else they're prepared to be doing. I think I do want to just say that it's absolutely fine to not be a full-time artist straight off the bat, and I think you need to build up your art business at a pace that works for you. This idea that you'll have a gallery and then you'll just have a stipend or regular income that's going to replace any salary that you've been having is sometimes a bit misguided. That can take a lot of time to build up. I mean, certainly it does happen for people, but you understanding what your art business is, and your own inventory and things like that is always going to be necessary. And you probably need to do that before, if you're thinking of like quitting the job and going all in or something like that. I do encourage artists to like actually learn the sales skills, right? That you can like make a promotion for some prints that you've got, for example, or a special edition, or how to launch your new body of work directly to your audience, so that when you do start selling through a gallery, that one, you've got proven sales, but there is a market for it, which is going to help galleries want to say yes to actually taking you on. But should that gallery relationship not go on forever, then you still have a business under that you know how to use, and the sort of people that you need to hire. It might be that your weaknesses, and okay, well, I do need to hire somebody to come and take photographs, or do my social media, or a studio assistant to do shipping and things like that for a couple of days a week. So all of those things are always going to exist. So you're building out your own business first, and sometimes having a day job or a part-time job doing other work is going to actually help you fund that. It's going to help you cover those costs that you need to actually be able to grow. So I think taking your time, but that commitment to it, because we've said before, art is something nobody asked you to do, so you're here doing it because you love it. It's probably a non-negotiable in your life. It is now usually for people in my world, something that they want to be compensated for working from their gifts. So it might not be an immediate path to full time, but you can kind of pace it out and see what you need to do and figure out the support you need to get in to be able to get there.
Well, that was fantastic, and I'm also curious now about whether you have thoughts around the framing aspect of work, because some artists aren't as aware of how important professional framing is. I mean, you feel differently, but I've had work professionally framed, and it seems to have made a huge difference to the presentation of the work. But also the gallery that I work for, or work with, I should say, he has his artists always frame all of their work in the same type of frame. So it's one style of frame for every piece, to encourage buyers and collectors to see sets in the exhibition. Is there anything like that that you have thoughts on and experience with?
No, I do think it's important for artists to understand framing. Before I even moved into curating, I did a part-time evening class in framing just because I was interested in it. And it was later that I realized that this wasn't something most galleries and curators and even artists are familiar with. So I would say go and invest in a 6-week night class if you can. But just understanding, the literally the construction of frames and then the different types of frames. And so that you know how to do it yourself at those times, you need to get it, you often need to do a tweak and a thing. I don't, but in terms of, so that was framing. What I would say is, when you're making paintings or prints or something like that, diversity in sizes isn't great within a single collection. I do like a rhythmic display, and so if you can get all your, let's say you're going to make a new body of work and it's going to be all on canvas, getting identical size canvases is going to be really, really helpful for that end display. And that is where it does help, as your gallery said to you, and I totally believe and have experienced it myself, is that, when we want to then sell companion pieces, right? You're getting people to buy more than one to take up a larger space rather than one big one, for example. Things like that can really help it kind of move in the marketplace as well. And again, this is not saying that don't try all the other things, but really think about that end presentation there as well. Because when you've got one, I don't know, one portrait and then one square and one landscape and one, all the different formats and different dimensions, it's really messy. And that can sort of hold up how you display it and things like that. So some consistency across size is something. I think, it's a slightly different angle, but it is about your art business. And you see this in all businesses, right? We have different entry points. So if you have very large work, or you have installation work or something like that, I know yours is actually mostly paintings, isn't it? Your audience. But if you have very large paintings, then you do need to think about what else people might be able to access and buy from you at a smaller scale. So would you do a studio sale of like studies, or would you actually make prints of it? And that can be hiring a silk screen print studio to do that for you, or you can go down the giclée route. Or could you periodically or once a year kind of create a slightly smaller scale painting and then offer them out? So those different entry points is always good. Like, I'm at the moment, if we even look at, like I said, like literally look at another business within mine, I have like a £40 like masterclass, or then you can buy a £200 program, or you can buy I don't know what else. The next price is like 500. And then, you can go bespoke and have like one-to-one coaching with me. So that's the same kind of ladder that you might want to think about for your business. And it doesn't all have to happen now, but it is about putting your, just thinking about how that's going to work in the future. Even, those big name artists like Tracy Emin, for example, you can still buy a print of hers for under 1,000, for example, or Ai Weiwei, for example. They all do still have that smaller end accessible price range as well. So to sort of think that through, and if then you can have maybe, whether it's large scale at the high end, or it is bespoke commissions or something like that, for example. That is one thing actually on that subject, and is pricing. The artists do need to know their pricing, and having tested that in the marketplace and edging up the prices, you only want to be moving upwards. So, not if you are new to entering the marketplace, then finding that entry point that you're comfortable with, that you can energetically receive, feel compensated for, not feel like you're scamming anyone, not feeling undervalued. You want to find that sweet spot, but knowing that you're going to be moving upwards from there. And I think if you are offering work for sale with the same dimensions, complexity, all those sorts of things, later on, then I usually have told people that the prices are going to go up from June the 1st. So, it's your last chance to get this artist work at this price. So you can kind of let your audience know, assuming you're building out that audience on social media and your mailing list and places. So giving them a heads up just to create a bit of urgency to buy now before your prices go up on the 1st.
That's really interesting. Yeah, thank you. Now, I did want to pose one thing as well, which has only been brought up, I think, once on this podcast, but I find it very interesting, which is there's been a couple of galleries that I've come across and I don't exhibit with, and they charge for the wall space as well as taking a commission. How do you feel about that type of contract with the artist?
I don't love it. This is not what I call selling through a gallery. I think you and I both agreed that what we're talking about is gallery representation. So, but I am at peace with the fact that all these different models exist and they are allowed to coexist. It's not something I encourage an artist to do. There's only one success story I've ever heard out of this. It was an artist I think it was somewhere like Malaga, and he showed at one of these vanity galleries, let's use the word, in London. And so he had the show in London, nothing much came of it. However, him telling his Malaga audience that he'd had this exhibition in London really piqued that audience's interest, and he was able to sell quite a lot of works to them because they were now of the idea, oh my God, we better get in on this guy because he's showing in London and that's going to, his prices are going to move really soon. So it was used quite strategic. It wasn't intentional. That's how it kind of played out. So, if you are strategic in that, it does allow you to show in another country, I guess, if that is your goal. But it's not something I really encourage. I don't think I've heard great stories around this sort of model at all.
Yeah.
And I think, if you're an artist sort of wondering how to show in London, for example, and you're based somewhere else in the world, there are other ways. There's art fairs that you can apply to and actually come and exhibit and be here yourself, where you're going to be on that fair booth, for example. You can connect with other artists that are also showing in London and take part in a group show that is organized maybe by a collective or something like that, and really start thinking about your network as well, so that, yeah, you can be put into group shows with people in other countries. But if you were going to rent a gallery space and literally man it yourself, so it would literally just take an empty retail unit, I think that is fine, and I think that works really well. And that, I do like those artist-owned exhibitions, that format. But the slightly more pay-to-play is less compelling.
Yeah. No,
What are your thoughts on that?
no, it's the same. I've spoken to a professional artist who seems a little bit more sympathetic to that model than I am. And I feel as though your work should speak for itself and should get on the wall by its merits and not by renting the wall space, because there's already a commission agreement with the gallery. But that's my feeling, and I think that's the conversation we had with the artist who was the guest at the time, is that we felt it was a bit of a tricky way of getting your work on the wall, and unless you can be opportunistic like this story you told, it's not really, I don't think, the best way to ingratiate yourself with your market, because it's such a risk anyway to pay to have your work on the wall in the hopes that it would sell and pay off, as opposed to being ingratiated with a gallery. And that's what I was going to ask you next, actually, is what's your ideal way? Oh, sorry, did you
Yeah, no, I was just going to add to that. It's like that gallery model is just a different thing to those galleries who are making income from sales. So I think, I don't even know if you're ingratiating yourself with that gallery, really. I've not heard of people having long-term relationships with those types of galleries either. But, if you needed to have a show and you wanted to rent some space, and that gallery was the best option, but they were not taking commission, because that model also exists, or they were taking a very small, like 5-10% commission, then that can work if you are going to bring your own audience and you've got more strategy behind it and you've got more control, because a lot of times they're not as invested in making sales. They don't have an audience. Or they have an audience that is very general, that likes to come out for private views, but is not really a actual collector base. And because of that model, they don't have a strong aesthetic. They'll just pretty much show anybody that will pay for the wall space. And that can also dilute the artist's brand of what they want to be seen as and where they want to be seen. So there's a few other considerations with it there. But go on.
No, please, no, that was really good, actually, and very true. There's a couple of things now which I wonder. One is about exclusivity deals, because obviously you don't want an artist in two galleries across the road from each other selling the same artist's work at varying prices. How do you feel about exclusivity, and what range do you think is a fair, say, district to block off before the artist can sell outside of that range, if you are in favor?
So with exclusivity, I mean, depends on the artist. Like a lot of the artists I work with are, early and mid-career. So they're not, it's like exclusivity heavily exists at the top end of the market, but you do get new players in the industry that will think that's normal, and then they'll like offer that to their artists. And you just really want to be careful about how long you're tied in for, because so that is one thing, timing, like, what's the cool off period or notice period or something like that. I have worked with artists and we've been fine about them showing in other places. There's times I've had exclusivity on certain body of work, or and sometimes first dibs on new work. So that is a thing to think about with the galleries you're working with. But it can be geography, and it can be bodies of work that you're exclusively showing through one place. Does that make sense? So, you might have your small paintings, for example, through one gallery, and your large paintings through another. Or it could be, this collection of landscape paintings around Cornwall with this gallery, and my Lake District landscape paintings with the other gallery. So it can be like, let's call that a body of work. So you can do it in different ways. Yeah, you wouldn't have it if they're literally across the road from each other. But, that's kind of on the artist to have figured that out about where they're approaching and who they're having conversations with. The other thing is with fairs as well, that can come in, because there's a lot of gallery models now where the galleries really do a majority of their trade at art fairs, and they don't all have physical premises. It'll trickle along online in between. They might have a pop-up here and there, but really that the bulk of their income is coming through fairs. And so it might be that you have a couple of fairs that you're in exclusivity with for the UK, and then you've got different ones for different fairs specifically in the US, or it could be for the whole country. Only one gallery is taking around all the US fairs, or you have one for Chicago and another for New York, for example.
Yeah. What's the ideal way that an artist gets in touch with you? Do you have, because I've heard horror stories from galleries where people are trying to coax them outside to the car to come and have a look at what they've got there, and things like that. What's your ideal way of being introduced to an artist and their body of work?
It is, so I have a magazine, and that's called Art Scene. Oh, let me show you a picture here. And for that, we do have a submission process. So that is one way of being more on my radar, and for me to sort of see your work, because when I'm looking at the submissions, I am there in a way that I'm actually paying attention rather than sort of just flicking through social media. So that is one way. It is through being visible on my feed, I suppose. And that often starts out with, I don't know, commenting literally on stuff I've done or something. And, that starts then building rapport. I see their work, I start following them. That moves to the DMs. That's a bit of a courtship, really, isn't it? But it's that. It is when they have open studios that they invite me. Again, that can be through the DM or something like that. And it can be when if they don't have open studios or something like that, again, we've kind of got enough conversation going that they are inviting me to the studio, or hey, next time you're in Miami, I'd love to show you around the studio, kind of thing, whatever it is. So if they know I'm London based, for example. So that is good. And then and that works. And what else would I say? Yeah, and then it's just word of mouth after that, I think.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's good. Well, you introduced the magazine, Art Scene. How long have you been publishing that magazine?
Yeah, I'm very proud to say we've just published issue 12. It's a quarterly, so we started in 21. And yeah, so what's that, 3 years now? And yeah, so it's published in February, May, August, and November. So
Mm,
yeah, and so we have artists like profiles, we have interviews, we do little Q&As, we do longer essays, and then we just introduced a new column for our most recent May edition, where we ask a bunch of artists the same question about their creative energy or what's their favorite thing about the studio. So there's a slightly more sort of soundbitey things from the artists inside it. So yeah, it's
no,
a good one.
no, fantastic. Well, aside from the magazine, I am aware that you have a book. Can you tell us a little bit about your book, please?
I would love to. Here it is. It's called Show Your Art, How to Build an Art Career Without a Gallery. So I wrote this book. I mean, this book was like years in the making, to be honest. Like you always have that draft document there, don't you, on the computer? But anyway, at some point, I think it was late 2019, I was like, this thing is going to get written. And then, so when I actually published it, we were in lockdown. So published in April of 2020. But this book really, the start of it was when I used to get really shitty submissions to the gallery. Hey, can I show you my art? Do you want to see my pictures? This kind of thing. And I was like, oh, mate, you need some help here. And, I did run like little workshops at the gallery, for people to come down and just kind of do a bit of a run through of like what they need to get in place and what better presentation and things like that would mean. So anyway, this book is really how to build an art career without a gallery. And then you've got your career and now you're ready to go and work with a gallery and really, you're in a business to business relationship rather than, this helpless person and this kind of Prince Charming archetype that people think, galleries seem to occupy this space. So it is about how to build the foundations. It's about building your online presence. It's your website, what needs to go on it, how to optimize it, which sounds super dry, but it's actually very easy and quick. It's social media. And what we talk about in social media here is really about the messaging. So whatever the trends and formats and things like that evolve, right? Your messaging is still going to serve you. That still needs to be there. And then various checklists. What else have we got in here? Social media for artists, prompts for the written content as well. The email list, again, your audience is an asset, but this is an asset you take any place, whether you have a gallery or you move from London to Miami, it really doesn't matter. You've got that mailing list. That is an asset in your business that you should know how to use to be able to make sales whenever you're ready to offer work for sale. And that is an asset you also take into those business relationships as well, like whether it's a gallery or a stockist or anything else. So we talk about that and then actually showing your work, and that includes open studios, artist fairs, exhibitions, and things like that. And then marketing the exhibitions and also how to get media coverage. So once you kind of got a handle on these various things, then you also know what to expect of a gallery. If selling through a gallery and gallery representation is your goal, but you certainly know how to do it for yourself. You certainly know where your own skill set might be lacking that you can hire somebody in, but you at least know what the job description is going to be. So that is what the book is about. And I feel like I talked about it a lot, but it's really only about 100 pages or something. It's fine.
No, it's fascinating. I think that because of how this podcast has gone, I think people will be quite interested in learning more, because it's all to try and help artists out there who just don't have these skills that are inbuilt. We all try to do our best, but to be an artist is one job, and then to be able to manage social media and present yourself well, and all of these things that are really essential for success in being a professional artist, people don't always have that. So to have it in a book there by someone experienced like yourself is wonderful. Where should they go to purchase that if they want to? Where's it?
Yeah, you can get the book on Amazon. You can get it in print, or you can get it on Kindle if you don't want to wait and go paperless. Then you can get it on Kindle. I think it's $4.99 on Kindle and $12.99 for a print copy.
Amazing. Did you say, I don't know, did you say how long it took you to write that? Because I mean, to write a book must take forever. How long did it take you to write that?
It was, the thing with the book was originally, you want to put, when you're writing a book, you want to put everything you know into it. And then there comes a point where you realize, like, no, actually, this might be too advanced. Let me speak to a really specific type of artist at a specific point in their career, that maybe has tried a few things. They know they need to have an online presence. They don't have gallery representation. How can they show themselves? What can they be doing? And what is the fastest route for them to be able to achieve that? So yeah, it was kind of written very, it was edited down heavily from what I first thought it would be. And it's good, it's very concise, it's very actionable things in there. There's checklists for your website, for your art fair. Yeah. Social media prompts, also for your artist statement, again, clarity around that. So actually the artist statement, just go back a step, is something that we often talk about in studio visits. Not what is your statement, but I mean, putting yourself as an artist in conversation with people can really help you massage out whatever your sticking points are on what you think your artist statement is there as well. I think like doing it through conversation can really help, and that I found that to be really good, and kind of you're just getting different insights into how people are perceiving your work, or different frames of reference that they're bringing in when people actually see your work in real life.
Do you think, I mean, this is just a little extra thing that popped into my mind. Do you think that artists should have business cards? Is that something which you think is still a good way to, have contact with people who you meet?
Yeah, if you are out and about doing actual networking things, then yeah, I think it's fine. But I haven't had them for ages, and I've just started using. For a long time, I was just using social media as my business card, and I think this is also an interesting angle to think about, of like when you are using, say, Instagram, like if someone were to look at that and that was your business card, would they know who you are, what you do, how to get in touch with you, some evidence of your past work? So that's what I've been using. But recently, this last trip to the Venice Biennale, I felt like actually I should have had business cards, the way I was meeting people. A lot of people have QR codes and things like that, but you've got, a gazillion then open tabs on your phone, and then you close them and then you've actually lost it. It's not as effective. If somebody follows you, then okay, you can remember them. But yeah, I do think business cards for me is something I'm going to have to go back and make, and get printed out.
Yeah, it just popped into my, I know that as soon as we finish this meeting, I think that's what I should have asked you. So yeah, but it has been, just fascinating to be able to discuss this from your perspective. And I really appreciate it. So where is it you'd like anyone who's watching or listening to go and support you, to see what you do? What would you like to promote from the gallery, the magazine, the book, everything? What is it you'd like to promote?
Oh, well, thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, the book is called Show Your Art, and you can find that over on Amazon. And then there is the magazine. This is not the latest issue, but this is what it looks like. It's called Art Scene. And again, you can buy that on the print copies distributed through Amazon, or you can go to my website, which is called thecurators.salon.com, and there's all sorts of blogs and things like that for business support, and some free resources there for artists as well. You can see the page about Art Scene magazine, and we have an artist studio project on there as well, because I love going to artist studios. So we have this whole section which is artists sort of sharing their workspace. And on that website, thecurators.salon.com, you can also find some of my programs. And I've recently put out a program called Mastering the Art of Studio Visits. So that one is all about how to manage successful studio visits, whether it's with curators, galleries, collectors, media, industry professionals, whoever it is that you want to invite, and to see your work, to show your work, to do business with, and so on. So yeah, that is available on my website. My podcast is called The Curators Salon, and you can find that on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, and all the usual places. And on Instagram, I am found at the Gita Joshi.
That's fantastic. You've been so generous with your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being a guest on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you can support the podcast by leaving a like or a comment down below, that would really be great. But what we'd really like is if you're able to leave a review on the podcast channels, wherever you listen to it or download it, because that helps us get spread around the internet so that more people have access to us and able to see what we're making.
Also, follow us on Instagram, and we'd really appreciate it if you like and engage with our posts. Help get the podcast better known. Thanks for listening.